everybody, and welcome to another E5 podcast. This is weird, isn't it? We're just doing them consistently now. We'll have to stop and take a break. I mean, actually, we'll have to stop soon because I'm going to America.
You're disappearing, aren't you?
I am. I'm going to America again. Hello, everybody. My name's Paul Meenan. I am joined by my tag team partners. Introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm JW.
And it's Dave Watts here, aka Sparky Ninja.
They're not the JW who recently appeared on Fixed Radio, are you? Not that JW.
DJ.
Could it be the same person? Yeah.
It could have been you. Yes. John Ward was recently on Fixed Radio with us talking about hidden dangers in old wirings and electrical things. It was quite a good chat, actually, to be honest. It was refreshing talking about the old stuff, but it did make me feel rather old. Anyway, right. So what are we talking about today? So we said we'd only do these if we've got something to talk about. We've got a few more of these lined up. So we're going to get into one that I have been promising for many, many, many years, because this all started from a question when I first met Tom Nargi, who was doing work in schools. And then Paul Skirm highlighted the fact of, your BS 4163. And I was like, okay, what? So what we're going to do is we're going to review BS 4163, which is a British standard for health and safety for design and technology in educational and similar establishments. It's a code of practice. It's guidance of guidance of guidance, whichever way you want to cut it. So what I'm going to do the usual, because we like to have the black screens because it's good on the eyes. That is literally the only reason we go with black screens, because it's just less strain on the eyeballs, especially with modern screens. Right. Can you all see my screen, chaps?
Yes, mate.
Yep.
Marvellous. Right. So I wrote this because I was up this morning at 4 a.m. because this is how I rock and roll. I thought, it's a Saturday or Sunday and nothing else to do, so might as well do some research. And I've been looking at this for years and years and years and years. And I wanted to look at the key safety considerations for design and technology facilities and kind of compare it a little bit against 7671. So like when we did electrical installations in furniture, I think I said this was a companion standard. Now this kind of a very outer edge could be considered a companion standard, but I think this one is more aimed at teachers, tutors, people who run education establishments. Sparky Ninja. This is, if I was to, let's say, let's say Dave, you said, Paul, you're setting up Sparky Ninja HQ down south. This is the standard that I need to read and understand so that I can make sure Sparky Ninja HQ is on a good footing. We're going in the right direction. It's a good code of practice. So it's not electrical installations. It's wider health and safety, but it covers electrical installations and mechanical and gas and health and safety and risk assessments and all the things needed.
So to be clear, it doesn't just say electrical installations should comply with 767. It has specific suggestions and specific information that will take designs in some direction, or it'll give support to design. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it does actually say it will comply with 767, which
but as a general
roundabout of stupidity. But it does have additional requirements or more specifics. Just to be clear, folks who are listening or watching, don't get too excited. This is a fringe standard that I have to say is quite fascinating for me. I've never worked in a school. I've been to school, as we all have, but I've never worked in a school.
It's been on my radar, but I've just never really had the time to fully explore it. I say that with the electrical equipment and furniture one, I found quite interesting because it closely relates to things like PAT testing, because people in that sector are kind of bridging into that. So I knew it had relevance. I just haven't had time to kind of explore it. So this would be interesting.
This does actually cover it. So I'll go. It's published by obviously we have JPEL 64 or PEL 64. This is published by GM 327 committee, and all I can see from that committee is that they published this standard and this standard alone. So it was first published in 1984, 42 beautiful pages, short and sweet. And then 6 years later it was revised, 58 pages, so about another 10. We then had 2007. It then nearly tripled in size to 142 pages. Then 2014 revised again, 146, so 4 more pages. And then again in 2021 bumped up another 18 pages. and we're currently on the 2022 Amendment 1 edition. So they've now started doing amendments to this standard, and it's currently set at 154.
So in
pages.
2007, did they just make the font bigger? I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot more. That's a lot more material.
Yes, there's a lot more.
Okay.
You can clearly see that stuff went from descriptive to prescriptive, performance-based.
Gotcha.
Lots of vague, generic stuff rather than telling people how to do things. But yeah, there's standards have evolved, and as we've always discussed, John, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what it is. Right, so let's introduce it. So BS 4163. I don't know why I've got 2014 there, because it's 2022, so that's my typo straight away. 4163 provides a code of practice for health and safety management in design and technology areas of educational establishments, schools, colleges, workshops. For those guys or girls listening, the workshops. It includes requirements for risk assessments, electrical safety, fire precautions, tool and machinery usage. It covers a hell of a lot more than that. Local exhaust ventilation. It covers chemical use, COSH, RIDDOR, all the full spectrum of health and safety stuff. It covers it in quite a lot of detail, which is quite interesting because it gives you things which I'll get into that you go,
That's what I can see with these images. I'm assuming that this obviously covers, as you say, with craft design technology areas, workshops. So this also covers electrical installations and other areas that students are using.
Yeah. So for specific, there's actually specific sections on motor vehicles. So one quick one, which I read but isn't in this presentation. So where they've got automotive workshops, sockets must be at least 1 meter high. That way any arcing isn't causing an ignition of any low-level fumes that may be gathering. So there's very specific stuff in this. But sorry, John, you were going to...
Yeah, just things like plastic conduits not allowed because it's too breakable, and other such gems which are contained within it in various places. So I'm sure we can cover that later.
He's just spoiled my main event slide there, but no, yes, absolutely. Yes, plastic conduit, absolutely recommended not to be used. So, yes, where do we use plastic conduit anymore?
No, see what? Okay, I mean, we'll crack on with this, but I mean, I've recorded videos when I've been doing like EICRs of like dado trunking, where you pull a cable and it pulls on the plug and it slides the lid around. So there must be kind of other issues with those kind of wiring systems. This would be interesting.
So it provides recommendations for persons who provide instruction to learners, employees, trainee teachers, and adults in the use of equipment and machinery. So this is exactly what I was saying to Dave. If I was setting up Sparky Ninja HQ, this would be one of my go-to for, am I creating a safe work environment for Sparky Ninja down south? So that's the mindset of it. So for tutors and trainers, 4163 is an absolute must read. Print it out, have it in the office, use that when you're doing your insurance visit, your risk assessments, whatever. That's where it really hits home. This is not a day-to-day electrical installation standard, but for those nerds who love their electrical installations and electricery, then yes, there's some good nuggets in here. Before I do though, I love the way that, I think it's a thing that me and John especially love, is all those nuances of, if you look at page 2, it says people are responsible for using their own engineering judgment or skill, etc. Well, in this one, it's got a little bit more information I'd like to go through. So it talks about the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which places a general duty on employers to ensure, so far as reasonably practical, the health and safety of employees or other persons affected by the activities. It's a general duty because it's one of the highest laws in the land. So it's open to interpretation. That way you can be prosecuted. The management are sitting under that, if everybody remembers our pyramids from any of the earlier podcasts. The Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations, 1999, requires employers to carry out risk assessments for the purpose of identifying what is required to comply with the general duty and any relevant regulations made under this Act. Electricity at Work Regs, CDM, blah, blah, blah. So, Dave, when you're doing your risk assessments for your building, you will be complying with the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations. And by default, Health and Safety at Work Act. Implementation of this British standard is not a legal requirement, but it does provide one means of demonstrating that reasonably practicable steps have been taken to minimise risks from the machinery, equipment, processes, and materials used. The recommendations in this British standard cannot ensure the health and safety of learners' employees without proper training and supervision. Anyone in charge of a teaching space covered by this British standard is advised to consider the desirability of having recognised accredited training in health and safety. So it's clearly saying if you're going to use this, have some sort of safety qualification. This British standard is intended to be a useful guide to those who teach and manage in design and technology areas in educational establishments, and it aims to contribute to the prevention of accidents and dangerous occurrences. Employers and employees can incorporate the recommendations of this British standard into their working environment. So it's good practice, a code of practice. This British standard has also been written for persons responsible for providing services, equipment and machinery in educational establishments, and for persons employed to work in these establishments. If similar resources are used in other school departments and colleges of further education, the recommendation in this British standard can be applied to these departments. They can also be applied where learners are undergoing initial teacher training. That's very, very specific introduction there.
It is, yeah.
But I've never seen that in a British standard to that level of this is what we're here for. John, would you like to wittily talk about the use of the document?
Yeah, use the document. So as a code of practice, this British standard takes the form of recommendations and guidance. It is not to be quoted as if it's a specification, because it's not a specification. Users are expected to ensure that claims of compliance are not misleading. Basically, this just lumbers it all on the end user, and the publishers of the document will not do anything and can't get involved. So users may substitute any of the recommendations in this British standard with practices of equivalent or better outcome. So just like BS 7671, if you don't like what's in it, you don't have to comply, but you better have some pretty good evidence as to what you're going to do instead of that. You can't just write a bit of paper, couldn't be bothered, because that's not going to do it. And any user claiming compliance with this British standard is expected to be able to justify any course of action that deviates from its recommendations. So yeah, you need a pretty substantial amount of evidence if you're going to do something that's different to what it says. And it's been assumed in the preparation of this British standard that the execution of its provisions will be entrusted to appropriately qualified and experienced people for whose use it has been produced. So incompetent types need not apply, just like all of the others.
I find the middle paragraph probably the most interesting I've ever seen in a British standard. May substitute, because we've been saying this for years, Dave, you may substitute any of the recommendations with practices or equivalent of a better outcome, which is great, because this is what we say, work from the intent of the standard. Yeah. This is a code of practice, work from its intent. If you've got something better or equivalent, you're leveling up.
The key is to think, oh, what else is there that targets educational establishments like this is clearly doing in that previous slide, where it's clearly labeling what it does, and is there anything else that more closely targets it? Because if you step away from it, you go backwards, you just put educational establishments into a generic category with other types of installations you work with, then you're missing the point of this guidance or this standard, aren't you? Interesting that they say it's not a specification, it's a standard.
Yeah.
Trying to get my head around, I mean, because I know obviously like PAS 1899 is a specification, not a standard. So I'm trying to remember they're different in the relationships between specifications and standards now. The specifications
PAS are a sponsored low-level entry document that eventually can become a British standard. It's like a quick access. But when you look at it, they're all guidance. It's all guidance, regardless of what you call it, code of practice, spec, whatever. It's all guidance, because the only thing that is law is the law.
But it's strange, because I was of the opinion that if something was a standard, it would have more behind it than if it was a specification.
Gravitas.
Yeah, than as if it was a specification. But the way it says it's not to be quoted as if it were a specification suggests it's trying to flip that, saying it's not a specification, it's just a standard. But I thought it was the other way around.
The sarcastic one in me would say it all depends what you call it. I mean, some could say it'd be foolhardy to call a document requirements and regulations in the title. Let's make it sound more important than what it is. But yeah, a fascinating one. It really is a fascinating one. Now, my favourite line, John's favourite line, we see it all the time. This publication is not intended to constitute a contract, obviously. User is responsible for its correct application. But how many contracts I see with standards listed and blanket statements of you will fully comply. Now, I think that is probably the ultimate incompetency of clients, where to indemnify themselves, they say we're paying a contractor to comply with all these standards without understanding the intent or the outcomes of those, and then wonder if somebody does then try and price for it, it goes through the roof and they go, oh, I'm not paying for that. But compliance with the British standard cannot confer immunity from legal obligations. So even if you think you've complied, it doesn't mean you're not going to prison. Bit of a sort of a resonating, just think, don't try and go, I've got a bit of paper, it's a risk assessment done. So within this standard, again, it's not like the wine regulations. It's got lots and lots of subcomponents within it, and it will state very clearly, like, you must have health and safety management within this education establishment, and that the employers must conduct risk assessments to comply with Health and Safety at Work Act. The risk assessment should consider hazards, the likelihood of that hazard appearing, the risks and the severity and the impact, and risk reduction measures and all that sort of stuff. Because, you know yourself, Dave, you're teaching electrical installation. You've got sharp objects, you've got stocks, dies, you've got drills, you've got lots and lots of moving things that can injure people, entangle people, young, inexperienced, unconfident people. So training and design technology areas are incredibly high risk.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts and there's lots of risks, and every one of them has to individually be assessed and managed, don't they?
It also requires you, as part of that, to have emergency procedures and obviously first aid. So you've got to have emergency procedures for whatever you do, whether you're decanting oil from an automobile, whether you're, using tallow and you've got COSH assessments. I'm showing my age now, tallow, God's sake. But if you're using chemicals, COSH, sharp objects, you've got to have, the right first aid facilities and all that sort of stuff. Now, the only way you're going to get good health and safety management is I'm going to use the definition of competent person, because it's in the standard.
Is that from the standard, is it?
It is. This is 3.1 from the standard. A person suitably trained and qualified by knowledge and practical experience, and provided with the necessary instructions to enable the required task or tasks to be carried out correctly alongside the user of the machinery and or equipment, and giving their full attention to the user. I like that.
It's funny it doesn't mention preventing danger.
Yeah, but I think carried out correctly is their
way of interpreting that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I quite like it.
I like
the
wording of I like qualified by practical experience.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's what it means. Qualified by knowledge and qualified by practical experience.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that's what that takes.
I like it. Yeah. Suitably trained. There's a lot of stuff you go, how are you suitably trained? How did you gain practical experience? How did you gain practical experience in the workshop? How were you able to give the full attention to the user? I really like it. There's a lot of conversation around what is competent. So for those running a training school, there you go. Your competent person is defined in your 4163 standard. Anyway, so some of the key responsibilities, I don't know why, but I'll tell you why this is 2014, because I've spent 2 hours reading 2014 when I was reading this, and then realised it had been updated, so I had to read.
I was going to say, you probably started this before.
I did. I started on the 2014 edition, and I had to read the new one, and
I see.
What a nuisance. So again, those key responsibilities, kind of reminder, employers, it's not an electrical installation standard, but employers must conduct risk assessments and ensure compliance with health and safety laws. If you don't know it exists, you've got bigger problems. Teachers and technicians must follow safety protocols and train the students. So before they start a lesson, there must be written protocols, written risk assessments. Again, Dave, I'm teaching you to suck exits, so tell me to shut up.
I love it. I mean, I'm just thinking in my head, at times we talk about like medical occasions, we need to seek the expert input in our designs. We can't just make assumptions of the designs. This is doing the same kind of thing for educational establishments. If we're going to have design, we need input for our designs, and this is a good source of input at this point. So yeah, I love it.
That is a good point, actually, because this does, I haven't included it in the presentation, but it does include explosive atmospheres and the need to assess whether DSEER assessments and various bits. So students must adhere to safety guidelines and use PPE. That I feel sorry for every tutor in the country, because that is that's an uphill battle with some of the modern learners. And it says electrical installers must ensure compliance with BS 7671 and safe installations. I can hear John's thoughts.
Yeah. Well, BS7671 and safe installations don't always go together. They can, but
I guess
compliance
that's
with one isn't
yeah.
necessarily compliance with the other. So
That's probably why they put there and safe.
Well, we'll
you
come
can
on
make
to
an
that.
assumption that 767
So
one in that.
in 7.2, there's a few bits. It does state again, all electrical installation must comply with 7671. It then also says avoid trailing leads. It then says plenty of sockets, so lots and lots of sockets. It actually says if you can't put a socket in, you have one hanging from the ceiling rather than a low level. No time delayed RC. These are some electrical tidbits now. No time delayed RCDs. Every socket has to disconnect at 40 milliseconds and comply with 61008, 61009, or 7233, I think it is the plug top one. And there's also requirements for lighting, which is unique, I think, because you don't really get a defined lux level, but these guys just go for it. And again, just some other tidbits. So the electrical equipment must be suitable for the intended environment, regardless of whether there's gases or petrochem fumes or wood filings or metal filings, whatever. There's quite a lot of references to consideration for high protective conductor currents.
Like school IT rooms and things.
Yeah, but yeah, and it talks about subdivision of the installation. So pre-amendment 2 stuff. Lots of pre-amendment 2 stuff. Socket outlets should be protected by RCDs. Periodic inspection every 5 years. So it doesn't do what we normally do and say, right, we'll go to guidance note 3 and let the designer suggest the initial periodic. It's no, you will do it every 5 years. That is lazy.
Yeah, again, I would argue there could be sometimes cause for different areas of an educational setting to warrant more rapid and less rapid frequencies.
Just to put it into context here, the railways say EICRs every 5 years because they're lazy.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that. They budget for it. It's a cycle, but if the inspector says this is knackered, it needs to be 2 years. It needs to be that. In 7.2.6, as John said earlier, plastic CMS is not encouraged due to the fact it doesn't have sufficient mechanical protection. There's also the DSEA, dangerous. Oh, it's trying to remember.
Explosive atmospheres.
Yeah, it's explosive atmosphere regulations, especially in workshops for motors, obviously, where you can get emissions and all that sort of stuff. Electrical safety 7.2.5. There is a need, and this is one of the niche ones. There is a requirement for emergency switching for work areas, not prep areas where you might get technicians preparing all the tools, but in the functional work areas like the bays, there is a requirement for emergency switching, which should switch off all local hazards, but not the support system. So if somebody screens in a bay, the tutor should be no further than 2 meters away, hit a plunger. That plunger will switch off the bay, but not the emergency lights, the local exhaust ventilation, any alarms, etc. So remove the direct hazards.
This is interesting because obviously working in the electrical environment, I'm familiar with the City and Guilds model assessments, drawings and stuff. And it'll say in the spec that there should be some consideration of emergency and safety, but it doesn't give you any strict, you must have this, you must have that. So some places will have a stop button that will hit a contact, so they'll kill all of them. Some will have a local one that just does the one. Some will have a rotary isolator. So it's interesting that there's this here that can kind of probably in some cases prove some training centers not to be quite as safe.
Yes, so the City and Guilds guys in theory should be referencing 4163, and it should be resettable via a key. And I've seen it in loads of workshops, and I've always thought to myself, why and where they bought it from. And it was only when Tom Nargi asked me, then Paul went, oh yeah, because Paul, Paul's familiar with lots of training, and he basically said, oh no, this is what you do. And that was the first time we went off on one about the plungers and what's an emergency stop, what's functional.
There wasn't a week or two go by without Paul talking about these switches and they shouldn't be red on yellow if they're not emergency and all this stuff. And he kept going into this. He was very, very pushy on it.
Speaking of, the minute you mentioned equipment and machinery, it also has a lot of requirements for machinery, which if he was here, we would be talking about now. Supervised use of high-risk machines, bandsaws, routers, grinders. Absolutely, that needs to be supervised. I have actually seen people not be supervised when I visited college, to be honest with you. Machines must have emergency stop switches local and appropriate safety controls. Motor protection for loads above 0.37 kilowatts. Very specific on that. Don't know why. But and also they don't like motors connected via plug tops. They've got to be via a fused spur, which is
Interesting.
another.
Yeah,
But it
that
doesn't.
0.37, it's half a horsepower, so it's been converted from some other measurement to something which doesn't make any sense.
Isn't that in the regs?
Yes, it is.
It is. I thought so. Yeah.
There you go. Right. So I'm learning every day. You said there's also the requirement for use of local exhaust ventilation or LEV for dust and fume extraction, and obviously there's requirements for the ductwork to make, because obviously if it's you've got to make sure there's no fires in them or explosions or any sort of stuff like that. It does go into a lot of detail, but it's good because it gives you everything you need within your workshop, your site area. Some other bits for workshop equipment machinery. Supervised use required for high-risk machinery. Machines must have emergency stop switches and interlocks. Regular maintenance inspections to ensure safety doesn't define what they are. And I'm sure it'll be more than 5 years because it's machinery. Probably every 12 months or before every use, no doubt, because I'm pretty sure now you have to do dynamic risk assessments anyway. And then there's also requirements for noise and vibration limits to protect users, which is also LEV, lower emission value, and about protecting. So LEV's mentioned twice in the standard, confused me a little bit, but that's fine. And all that, basically, what you can seriously tell is this is all about health and safety of machines, the environment, the users.
Yeah.
So it's very specific. If I moved on now, Dan would laugh at this if he was actually on. Fire risk assessments required. Again, not really a massive amount of detail as to what constitutes a good fire risk assessment, but it does state proper storage of chemicals, flammable liquids, and compressed gases. Fume extraction, LEV required for hazardous processes, and then obviously PPE must be provided. Now, just for everyone, and I was hoping Dan would jump on tonight actually, but fire risk assessments are mandatory, so don't think for 1 minute that 4163 is a minimum. It's a law. You have to do fire risk assessments. Proper storage of gases and chemicals, i.e. LPG, acetylene, solvents, that they should be in metal containers, bundled, and all that sort of stuff. You should have COSH, data sheets, DESIR assessments, all the rest of it. And obviously clearly marked fire escape routes and extinguishers in all work areas, including emergency lights or signage. So yeah, and you must have obviously an emergency escape plan and all those various bits and bobs. Moving on to lighting. So it actually borrows from CIBS ELG5. It states just escape lighting to be provided. That's it. So but that's going to be a 0.51 lux malarkey. But then it says 500 lux in food prep areas with an RA of 80 minimum, which modern lighting now 80, yeah, you're looking at least 90 now, unless you buy some cheap tap from China that's 35 pence and it's got an RA of 70 or 60 or 50 and that's to do with the color output, the quality of it and stuff. There is a requirement for 500 lux for bench or machine work, 500 lux for fabric areas, 1,000 lux for fine bench and machine work, plus task lights if required.
So, okay, we would define it as task lighting, wouldn't we? Task specific lighting requirements.
So that's quite bright.
I'm gonna say that's quite a change of general lux to task lux. There must be some kind of
it's all in the one sentence. And the worst thing is, you think yourself a railway platform at 150 lux is bright.
Yeah.
Mother of God. There is lots more requirements on lighting about having blinds, Cat 2 fittings, which I'm pretty sure Cat 2 doesn't exist anymore. That died with fluorescent. Maybe wrong, maybe a little bit rusty.
I'm pretty sure that went out like 20 years ago at least.
Yeah.
It's because that was the deal where you had to have special louvers and diffusers and all that malarkey above screens and whatever, and then it all went in the bin suddenly. Yeah. So that's a bit bizarre. Just go back to the RA thing. Basically, it's one measurement of the quality of the lighting in terms of color rendering. It's not a particularly good one because there are others, but it basically means you can't have low pressure sodiums as your primary illumination source because that simply would not do, would it?
This has upset David so much he's got up and walked away. But yeah, no, so you must consider glare. Now, I'll be honest with you, I think this is a legacy hang-up, John, when they haven't updated the standard. That's what I think, my personal opinion is. There's lots more guidance out there now. The lighting industry, every couple of years, runs ahead of itself. Again, I'm going to keep banging the drum. Risk assessments. Employers must identify, eliminate, or reduce hazards. So to answer Dave's bit earlier on, PPE, gloves, eye protection, hearing protection must be provided. So the duty of the workshop or place to provide all that. And one that isn't talked about much, ironically, is regular training and refresher courses for staff. How many tutors are regularly trained? Now I can tell you this, John, the amount of tutors I've met, they do their own retraining. They train themselves. They don't get it from their colleges. They're too busy, too much paperwork, too much admin, not enough time. And again, obviously with all this risk assessment, it's always that balance of cost and time. And I find that every good tutor out there will always put the hours in well beyond what their contracted hours are, because they're not worried about costs. They're trying to get the quality of the outcomes and the learners and stuff like that. Right, so within this standard as well, it also defines, the duties of the designers, installers and employers. So obviously the various people have to ensure compliance with relevant British standards and safety laws, or not, if they choose not to comply with any British standards. There must be safe working environments with appropriate safety measures, barriers, enclosures, lighting, functional stops, emergency stops, all that good stuff, exhaust ventilation, looking for vibration, making sure, there's lots and lots of safety controls.
That must closely align with PURE.
Provision and use of workplace equipment regulations. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is it's such a unique standard, because it goes, honest to God, this is a 10% tour of what's in the standard. The gas stuff alone, natural gas, is off the charts. There's so much very specific information for natural gas installations and isolator valves. And do you remember when we were in school, we used to play with the Bunsen burners, and you have the little rotary isolator and you'd put your hand through it and go, look, I'm not on fire, while the tutor wasn't looking. And again, there must be regular inspections and maintenance of installations and machinery. What that is, I'm assuming it will be dynamic down to the assessors. There'll be a formal, and then there'll be a before use inspection, because I remember you being shown a pillar drill in CDT classes, and the tutor, when we went up there, he'd tell me to shut up, and he'd go, right, and he'd introduce me to components, and he'd say, I'm looking for damage, cracks. So he would do the inspection while educating me. And of course, I was too busy, looking out the window, or whatever, but he was thorough in what he was doing, because he was doing his pre-checks whilst trying to educate me why he was doing it. So Mr. Garner, I apologise for being an awful CDT student. He was my CDT teacher. So yeah, 4163 is a vital code of practice for health and safety in educational workshops. Employers must perform risk assessments and ensure compliance with safety standards. Interesting what the definition of an employer is, because is it a tutor's job? How much training has a tutor got? How does that get managed if they're a new teacher? Electrical, fire and PPE safety measures are critical in design technology spaces. That's a given, because that helps you manage risk. Electrical systems must comply with 7671 if you want. Employers must ensure risk assessments and safety management. There must be regular testing and maintenance of machine and tools. Fire and chemical hazards must be mitigated. And again, PPE and safety training are essential for students and staff. Now, if I were to compare the two, or make a statement on the two, 4163 focuses on health and safety in the workshop, and 7671 is one key standard for electrical installation, because we know there are other ones, like our electrical installations in furniture ones and fringe ones, that 7430, etc., all these other companion standards. So I think this, you could say it's a fringe companion standard, but it is a very far punt. So yeah, the kind of synergies, the alignment piece between the two, both require compliance to 7671, which is kind of obvious really, although who complies 7671 ever? 7671 4163 require RCD protection socket outlets. 7671 mandate periodic electrical inspections, but 4163 mandates every 5 years, whereas we have guidance note 3 to allow the inspector to make an informed decision. Earthing and bonding requirements aligned. There is a little bit about earthing and bonding, and it's pretty much just referred to 7671, make sure stuff is bonded and all that voltages are limited. And they obviously both emphasize fire protection, with 7671 obviously heavily focused on safety devices, and well, 7671 is growing into a fire standard at the rate it's going on. Some of the conflicts, design responsibility. So BS 4163 outlines the roles for teachers and administrators, whereas 7671 assigns responsibility to electrical designers. Obviously, 125 I think it is as well. Machine isolation differences. 7671 provides detailed isolation rules. 4163 has very limited guidance, but it does give you enough to create mechanisms for the work area, if that makes sense. And then obviously RCD ambiguity. 7671 mandates RCDs for all sockets up to 32 amp, but 4163 doesn't give you that level of D. It doesn't. There's no limit. There's no alignment in that.
Has it been updated with 767 with regards to the RCD test? You know, does it say RCDs 40 milliseconds?
Yes.
Or does it just say RCDs?
Yes, no, it does give 40 milliseconds. It has very specific stuff on that we mentioned earlier, but it doesn't go any further. The only bit it does cover is the subdivision of the installation to ensure leakage current. I think that the 2022 edition was written on the 18th edition. I don't think it's been updated in alignment, if that makes sense. I think it's one of those natural one's gone further than the other.
Yeah. Okay. So with specificity of it, it's interesting they go down 40 milliseconds if it's just for teachers. Is this for them to self-check things, or? No,
this is a basic requirements for the electrical installation. So so 7671 aligns with electricity at work regs, or it tries to. 4163 focuses on risk management, but it also gives specifics on how to manage the risk. So natural gas. So for petrochem fumes in vehicle workshops, for making sure sockets ain't low level, they're all high level, to prevent the obvious known hazards that have occurred in educational establishments from not happening or being protected from. So this is why I keep saying it's like a fringe companion to 7671, but it's like I've take some from here, some from here, some from here, and then I will educate the educator, if that makes sense. So 4163 for a teacher should be a standard that they go to and they go, right, okay, there's my bread and butter 7671, great, what's different? What else do I need to learn about the workshops that I may be covering or teaching in? Obviously, fire protection, 7671, we talk about fire resistant wiring, LSOH, or whatever, suitable selector and erection. 4163 just emphasizes just general fire risks. There's no synergies there. One of the other things that is talked about is a holistic safety plan. 4163 covers workshop specific risks beyond electrical hazards. So it's that Health Safety at Work Act, Management of Health and Safety at Work Act, PURE, DESIR, doesn't really cover EAWR, kind of throws that over the 7671 fence, but just says then you must have lots of training, be competent, be capable. Oh, by the way, here's some local source ventilation, here's some vibration, low emission value, here's some natural gas stuff, here's some local emergency controls and all that sort of stuff. So kind of in conclusion, 4163 is for users, teachers, students, technicians. 7671 is obviously for installers, electricians and designers. There's definitely some responsibilities for design and compliance that need to be clarified. When I say clarified, it's not really mentioned. And obviously 7671 for electrical installation safety, and BS at 4163 for educational risk assessment. But there are crossovers. I'll be honest with you, 4163 is the most interesting standard I've ever read, because it's like someone put a load of standards in a blender, if I'm being perfectly frank. Okay. It really is like a hodgepodge. I'm not saying the committee did a bad job of it. I think it's a really good standard.
Do you think that something like this, which has obviously been kind of put together by more of the sector with some external consulting from the electrotechnical safety aspect as well as all the other aspects, might be a good way for other sectors to kind of develop things like, hotels and other places, railway, where they could have more of a standard? And whilst they may say 7671 in a blanket term, which is interesting about this, but it still has specifics. It's kind of like blanket term 7671 doesn't cover electric work regs specifically, but then it has specifics about RCDs and 40 milliseconds. It's
I would
weird.
love to write a BS 5163, and it would be electrical installations in railways, design and health and safety considerations. I would love to.
Before anyone says, "Oh, here's a book like that," nothing's written really for LV power for stations.
Exactly, and I would clearly state that on railway stations that the earth and neutral are combined, thanks to the fact that the traction current is combined, and the minute you bolt them together, and the RCDs may not meet the immunity values. So what else do you do? And henceforth, an electrical installation, just from an EMC perspective, is more industrial, not commercial. And
it would be a great piece of work.
I'd love to. I've asked the wiring committee on multiple times to do a special occasions for rail. I don't think it would do it justice. I think it would be difficult to get a British standard off the ground for railways, and not because of like anyone in Network Rail, because I think Network Rail would jump at it in a heartbeat. I just don't think people have got the time to commit to it. I think there's too much stuff going on. There's a lot of gaps in standards as well, and especially in rail, just confusion between BSENs and BS standards. And
well, you've got a few different sectors, haven't you? A few different stakeholders. Well, you've got the Office of Road and Rail as well. You've got they have their guidance. There's all sorts of different inputs, isn't there, into that space. Some of them are very resourceful and good, but there are conflicts between them.
Well, the best standard you can get is RIS 1855, which is LV supplies in overhead line areas. That is the most clear for an electrical installer. And if any installer on rail, I'm going to go on my monologue now. If any installer who does railway work says I fully comply with 7671, no, you have to comply with RIS 1855, and then everything else falls from that. But I won't go on that monologue any further. No. John, your thoughts, mate?
Yeah, well, it's totally like an interesting standard. I think one of the points is that in the front, as is often the case with these standards, it refers to a whole pile of other standards which you should also get, and should of course read in conjunction with this one. And that kind of fits into the whole thing about if you buy this standard, you've then got to basically buy all the other ones to go with it as well. But there's certainly quite a lot of interesting stuff in there, some of which you may not have thought of. In particular, the not just the electrical stuff, but the mechanical stuff and the basically health and safety stuff as well.
Yep, I don't agree. Dave, you're probably now sitting in you've got that look on your face of, crap.
No, not at all.
What have I not done?
Not at all. Not at all. What haven't I done? No, I'm sure. I've got no PV. I've got a little bit of PVC conduit down the wall, but it's only fitting a rotary isolator. But no, I think this is a nice little standard, and it highlights how we can easily take our opinions of design to different environments, and sometimes stamp things as a basic template, and then sometimes take the extra little considerations into account, working in kitchens and working in, offices and all these things. But sometimes school establishments are just that. Is it like an office environment? Is it like a little kitchen environment? And when this actually highlights educational. And you may just like broad stroke it, but there are some key things here. You mentioned obviously the design not to have PVC conduit and stuff, and that's an interesting thing. It's an interesting addition which will compromise a lot of potential designs that if you don't look at this standard, there's lots of designs that probably would just go throw in PVC conduits. So I always find it interesting when there's a standard that comes along which has such a spanner in the works to throw into designs like that, where it actually does, make a statement about, what you think about these environments.
Do you know what it comes across to me as? It's like an aid memoir. So if I was a designer, I would want to read this. Let's be perfectly frank. If you turn around to me tomorrow and said, "Could you do an electrical installation design in school?" I would say, "I think so," and then you'd get it wrong, because you'd read this and you'd go, "Emergency stop systems aren't good enough. Your containment's not good enough. This ain't good enough." So there are some this is definitely for anyone who runs a training establishment, anyone who works in a training establishment, anyone who's designing for a training establishment, and anyone who's installing in a training establishment. But again, it's another little known standard.
Yes.
Henceforth, it's worth having a chat about, because hopefully it brings it to the wider eyes of all 17 viewers who will watch this or
It's just
listen to it.
It's just to get it on the radar. You know, it's like it's the same one with the equipment in furniture. You know, we can easily just swallow that up into, is it a patch test? Is it an EICR? When we see pop-up sockets in furniture in a in a coffee shop or an office, and this is the same thing. The same thing. We'll just brushstroke
Just
educational under normal design, but there are requirements here.
There is an entire section on in-house service inspection and testing. So that's been updated with the latest, dare I say, PAT requirements. But again, not going into it because this could be easily, I'll be honest with you, Dave, this is a 200 slider.
Yeah, no, you've done very, very well to keep it brief.
Yeah, I tried to keep it brief because, to be honest with you, I was losing the will to live, because at 4 a.m. this morning, it was a really good idea to like resurrect it. And then by about 2 o'clock, my eyeballs were hanging out of my head, and I was just like, I need to go and get something to eat and have a break from this. But yeah, so that's it really. Yeah, BS 4163. Before we end this, I suppose, has anybody else got anyone want to say anything final thoughts wise?
Yeah, I was just one thing. If you're going to do an EICR on an educational establishment, you also need to involve 4163, don't you? Because you're not just assessing it against BS 7671, because you should be assessing it against what 4163 says as well.
No, I like that. That's going to raise some questions, that, because I like it when people go, "Oh, we don't have to worry about this. It's not in 7671." I fully agree.
Holy crap! Yeah. Okay.
People will disagree with that. I fully agree with that.
Hashtag controversy. Yes. Holy crap! Yes. No, you're right. You could absolutely use this to do your. In fact, you would have a very interesting time defending an EICR done on an educational establishment, and then someone got hurt, and you only use 7671.
This is probably another discussion for another podcast. The fact that this is what a lot of electricians are told by the CPS. It's like I've had the same debate with things like 5266 and 5839, where it says in 7671, those standards shall be complied with.
Yeah.
But even comments on them, they say no,
but it doesn't
apply. It's just a nonsense.
Dave, it's such a not fear. What a wonderful thing it does to people. So we did that one where we talked about 5839, and 7671 says you shall comply with 5839, and then 5839 says you shall comply with 7671. So by all intentional purposes, and given the sheer lack of information and guidance, if we want to put a code to a fire alarm system, we fucking can. But my God, did the industry have absolute panic attacks? No, you won't do that. Of course you bloody can. It's your engineering judgment. Page 2 of BS 7671. It's your judgment. It's not a CPS's, it's yours.
It's the same with if you see an issue with a potential conflict with 62305 and you think, hang on, I'm going to compromise this, or hang on, this isn't right. With your limited knowledge, you can still make a comment on it, especially if you think that the electrical installation has compromised it.
Yeah, and just on that, 62305, I think, has just been updated.
There has been an update, I believe. Yeah, I think Dane are doing some updates on it.
Dane are doing some. I'll probably have a chat with him at some point, but not in the coming months. Right, I will end it here. I believe our next few will be talking about how we make decisions and logical things, and then I'm going to do the most silent podcast I've ever done, where we're going to talk about maths and the challenges of electrical installation design and calcs and formulas. So I'm going to be as stupid as I genuinely feel. Yes.
Okay. Can I be quiet as well, or just?
Well, you melted our brain on that large scale EV one. That's for sure. That was good.
I've had a week of large scale this week, and I've been doing 2396 today. So my brain's fried already.
Well, and now we've just chucked in very late night a bit of 4163 as well.
Yeah, just to kind of soften the blow.
Just for anyone who knows and understands to a level the standards landscape. I mean, I've met and spoken to Graham Kenyon, who's like one of the chairs on JPEL, and his knowledge of numbers, you'd think the man was a bingo caller part-time. It's off the charts. The content and knowledge of these numbers, it's mind-blowing. I feel very stupid around people like them.
Yeah, but that's important. That's why it's important to network and communicate with those people. People who are smarter than you, the people you should reach out and network with, because surround yourself with smart people. It's the way to do it. Oh, it's always
Indeed.
people.
Right, well, on that bombshell, we will end it here. Hope you enjoyed the little whistle-stop tour of 4163, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of chat. And until the next one, take care of yourself and each other. Bye-bye.
Bye.